These are some of the easiest orchids to grow. They're hardy, they give you lots and lots of flowers, and they're almost indestructible. What are they? How do we grow them? And what are they called? Let's get straight into it. Here we have some intergeneric hybrids crossed with Mermecocattleya, Laelianthe, and they give these most magnificent blooms. Often they'll actually flower twice a year. They'll flower either in sort of that early spring into summer, or they'll flower into late summer into early autumn or winter. It's because of their parentage and because those intergeneric hybrids that actually breeds them more floriferous than what they would otherwise be, because you're getting genes from both parents. Here we have Mermecocattleya, Memoria, Louise, Fuchs, and here we have Leantha Tandeleyo. It can be very difficult telling them apart when they're not in flower, and even sometimes when they are in flower. But we'll get into their culture and how to tell the difference between them. So this Memoria Louise Fuchs is an intergeneric hybrid between Mermecocattleya tibacinus, and if you want to pronounce it in Latin, tibacinus, and Cattleya bicolor. So this is what gives it such a dark color to these petals. It gives that beautiful, almost burgundy, maroonish color. And with the mix of these two, since Cattleya bicolor has got those long pseudobulbs, and we all know Mermecocattleya gets those huge, big, fat pseudobulbs, we can actually get very big plants. Your pseudobulbs here can reach up to about 90 centimeters in height. So we are eventually going to get really, really big plants. Also with these, if you're potting them up, you may have to use bigger pots than you would otherwise, because they do tend to grow extremely vigorously. So often they're better mounted where they've got the space to run and make space for themselves, really, because they do become such big plants. And then you can see these beautiful long flower spikes that come off of those tall pseudobulbs. So these can be quite difficult to maintain indoors, surely because of their size. But also with these hybrids, because they've got that Mermecocattleya in them, they are extremely heat resistant. So even up to 32 degrees Celsius and they're fine. They're not going to complain. They do like lots and lots of light, and this is predominantly what causes their flowering. They need the light and the heat to produce flowering. So also they like high humidity. Well, slightly higher than what this Laelianthe would need. They like humidities of about 60 to 80% throughout the year. Also during their growing season, they like lots of moisture so that they can really grow well. So you may need to water them quite frequently, especially if they are mounted during that summer period, especially if you're getting those nice high heats that they like, or that they particularly like. Yeah, these will often flower in that summer period, late spring to summer, but here we can actually get them even to flower again in autumn, because what happens often is during that summer period we get our rainfall, our temperatures actually dip slightly at some points, and then as it comes towards the end of summer, suddenly the rain dries up, we get those drier periods, and that heat and lots of light. Some of the leaves have started to fall off the trees already, so we're getting extended light onto our plants, and this is what causes them to flower. And now with a very similar plant, but completely different parentage, this is Leantha Tandeleyo. This is a cross between Leantha baringiana and Laelia undulata. So it provides very much the same sort of flowering, very difficult to tell the difference, also very large plants, but they actually don't get quite as large as these Mermecocattleya's. But where your temperatures are slightly cooler like ours are, as we get into winter, your Mermecocattleya's are actually reduced in size because they don't like the cold. Whereas your Laelianthas don't mind the cold as much. They are much more accepting of a wider variety of temperatures and humidity ranges. So their humidities, they can grow in anything from between 50 to 70% is ideal for them. Also, they're not as water hungry as what your Mermecocattleya's are during that growing period. They are moderately thirsty, but they do also like a dry period during that winter rest. What causes them to flower is those fluctuations in those daylight hours. So often you'll find them starting to flower in that sort of spring period and in that autumn period where suddenly you start getting a change in the number of daylight hours. Also, a bit of a dry spell helps them flower as well. So that's why as we get to the end of summer, our rains sort of stop and we start getting those shorter daylight hours, and that's why we get these in autumn here. But these are quite floriferous, and as I said, you can get them quite easily to flower twice a year. The flowers are relatively short-lived. You probably get about 2 weeks out of them, but really worthwhile growing because they are so vigorous and they're so easily acclimatized to many different situations. They're also nearly indestructible. And when you happen to have both of these and you're a little bit confused as how to tell the difference between which one's which and perhaps you want to label them, the Mermecocattleya, Memoria, Louise, Fuchs will often get this sort of reddish purplish tint on those pseudobulbs, especially if they are in that bright sun. Remember, they really do like lots and lots of light, whereas your Tandalayos might prefer to get slightly less. You might get slight burns on the leaves if they get full midday sun, whereas your Mermecocattleya will probably be safer. And also, your Laelianthe is not, or very rarely, will get that red tint or coloration to the pseudobulbs. So that's one of the easier ways to actually identify the difference between the two, because they can, in certain climates, be almost identical. And of course, the other way of seeing them is when looking at the flowers of the Mermecocattleya, Memoria, Louise, Fuchs, you'll notice that they'll have those slightly darker colored petals. That's from the Cattleya bicolor parentage. And they'll still have that wavy, waxy look to them with those fine, thin petals and a bigger lip, which is often in a slightly lighter color. But their flowers are often slightly bigger than what you'll get with the Leantha Tandaleyo. You'll still get almost identical sort of shape to the flower with those wavy edges to the petals, those thin starfish type petals that they have, but you'll get a much lighter color. It's almost like a soft lilac pink, not exactly muted by any chance, but it's a much softer pinkish color than what we have with this Mermecocattleya, which has almost this deep burgundy sort of maroon color to it. This has more of a pink lilac sort of tone, and often still with that lighter lip and almost with a whiteness to the center. And as I said, the flowers are slightly smaller than what you'll get with your Mermecocattleya. Not always easy to tell the difference, especially with the way the hybridizing goes and the color differences you'll get in those different gene mixes. So they can start to look quite similar. But generally always the Memoria Louise Fuchs is going to be quite a bit darker and more maroony or burgundy than what your Tandaleyo is going to be, which harps back to those Goriantha Baringiana that we love so much. That color is just spectacular. Also, what you may notice is the longevity of the flowers. The Mermecocattleya with those slightly thicker, waxier flowers than what the Tandaleyo is they're going to last longer. They'll last between 3 and 4 weeks, possibly up to 5 weeks. Whereas your Tandaleyo, as I said, is going to last about 2 weeks. If you're lucky, you might get 4 weeks out of it. But also because they're not as thick and waxy as what your Memoria Louise Fuchs is, they're often far more sensitive to humidity and to water, even temperatures. If you get too much temperature fluctuations, your humidity levels drop, or it begins to run out of a bit of water, your flowers tend to drop relatively quickly on your Tandaleyo. Whereas the flowers on your Memoria Louise Fuchs are a lot hardier and are going to stay on board for a lot longer. They're not going to be as temperamental and fall off as easily. And also when it comes to the flowers, the Mermecocattleya often has a beautiful scent, which can be quite discernible at certain times of the day. Whereas your Tandaleyo generally doesn't have much of a scent at all. If it does, it's very slight, and it's just barely a scent you can pick up. And with that Memoria Louise Fuchs, you're always going to get that hint that there's something beautiful in the room. Also, you'll notice with the Mermecocattleya parentage, you'll often find there's 3 leaves on your pseudobulbs, whereas this Laelianthe, you'll often only find 2. There'll generally only be 2 leaves on each of those pseudobulbs. That also gives you another way of distinguishing between the 2. And there's the Laelianthe, one of the parents of this Leantha Tandelo. And these Laelianthes, their flower spikes can get up to 1.8 meters tall. So we can see where they get this long extended flower spike from that holds the flowers up so high. And we can see from its parentage here with the Laelianthe, only 2 leaves on each of those pseudobulbs. So that's brought through from its parentage into this hybrid. Growing indoors, you may actually find this Leantha Tandelo better to grow indoors than possibly this Mermecocattleya, because of the light conditions, the lower the humidity level requirements, and also the lower temperatures that it will accept. And if you're growing outdoors, your Laelianthe will accept temperatures of about 16 degrees, but they can accept a bit lower, up to around 28 degrees. Whereas your Mermecocattleyas want temperatures of around 18 degrees as they're cold, all the way up to 32 degrees or higher during those hot periods. Remember, if you are having hotter temperatures than that, then you may have to reduce the amount of sun or direct sun that they're getting. So perhaps that's why they do so particularly well on things like palm trees, because then they'll get that blasting sun in the morning and in the afternoon, but covered by that midday sun. So their leaves won't necessarily overheat. Also remember, they do need that massive amount of light to actually produce their flowers. If they don't get that light and the heat, you might not get any flowers from them. Whereas your Laelianthe is going to be a little bit more easy to coax without heat. And both of these plants need really, really well-drained media. They want either large bark chunks or any of those inorganic medias like charcoal, lava rock, broken brick, anything like that, they're going to do really well in, as long as you're making sure you're watering enough during that growing season. In the winter season, if your temperature's cool, then you can actually withhold water for long periods. Sometimes you may only need to water once a month, depending on how cold your temperatures get. With us, as we start getting cold in winter, we don't like to water our Mermecocattleya very much at all, because we don't want that evaporative cooling to take place to reduce the temperatures even further than they are during that cool winter period. So they can go 2-3 months without any water at all, but then that's particularly because our winter temperatures can get so cool. If we are seeing a little bit of dehydration and ridging of those pseudobulbs as they're drying out, then of course we will still give it that little bit of extra water to keep it happy. Also, none of these plants are particularly fussed or perturbed by insect attacks. We really don't have much of a problem with them. Also, the fungus doesn't seem to be as much of a problem on them as they are in some of our other orchids. So perhaps this intergeneric breeding has bred stronger plants than what their parents were naturally. And we find that they are pretty forgiving, incredibly hardy, and very little fuss. And both of them, if you've put them outside into trees or onto those palm trees like I suggested, and they have matured up, you won't ever have to look after them again. They'll look after themselves. That's how hardy they really are. So If you want a talking point in your garden, if it's not purely just for the size of the plants, but for those beautiful flowers, then these are a must. Also, if you have that bright sunny spot through one of the windows where nothing else really wants to grow, then try one of these, either Mermecocattleya, Memoria, Louise, Fuchs, or Leantha Tandaleyo. Both of them should give you brilliant results. And if you need any further advice on any other orchids, please don't be shy. Check out that Buy Me a Coffee link down below. Ed posts up a lot of information there all the time, available for everyone. And if you're interested, you can sign up and become a member and grow like a pro. Thank you for watching. If you found any of this information helpful, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and that notification bell, bing bong, to be notified of all our upcoming content so you don't miss out on a thing. Help us grow as we help your orchids grow.